Welcome to Supercool, the show about low-carbon innovations now scaling. Each week, we talk with the founders, CEOs, and executives whose companies are winning customers, growing revenue, and capturing market share by turning carbon-cutting ideas into competitive advantage. This is the rise of the low-carbon economy, a multi-trillion-dollar transformation already underway. I'm your host, Josh Dorfman. A quick note about a new course from Supercool before we jump into today's show. If you've been listening to the show for a while, first of all, thank you. And second, you've heard me talk about some of the sustainable ventures I've launched since my first eco-friendly furniture company called Vivavi back in 2004, to my most recent venture, Planted, a maker of carbon-negative building materials, which Fast Company named one of the world's most innovative companies in 2024. As a founder, I've come to realize that building really awesome climate innovation is actually half the battle. The other half is getting the market to buy it. Often, that part's even harder. And after interviewing over 50 of the world's greatest climate companies through this podcast, I started to see the same tactics and patterns emerge for how today's leaders effectively drive scale, build revenue, and win new business. We built the Supercool adoption playbook to distill the approaches they use into 5 easy-to-understand adoption levers so every operator working on climate solutions can use them too. The course is 8 modules comprised of 20 fast-paced, real-world case studies that show you exactly what today's climate winners are doing. It takes about 2 hours, and you'll get up to speed on the strategies you can immediately apply in your business or organization. If you're building in the climate space, check out the course. You can find it at getsuper.cool/playbook. Now, for today's show. The last time I spoke with Jigger Shaw on a podcast was 2018. Back then, my show was called The Last Environmentalist. A little bit of a downer, I realize, but I was moved by a quote from President Obama, who had said, "We are the first generation with the knowledge to know what we face in terms of climate change, and the last generation with an opportunity to do something about it." Jigger Shaw has been doing something about it his entire career. Jigger launched SunEdison nearly 2 decades ago and helped pioneer solar as a service, the long-term contracts that made solar possible without huge upfront costs. He went on to join Richard Branson to launch the Carbon War Room, an organization designed to accelerate market-based climate solutions, pushing real-world change in sectors like shipping, buildings, and aviation. Then Jigger co-founded Generate Capital, focused on financing and deploying commercially ready climate technologies at scale. That's really been his through line, not inventing, but deploying, making solutions cheap, financeable, and ready, so when the world is ready or forced to move, the tools are already there. We saw that dynamic after Russia invaded Ukraine, when Europe moved fast on efficiency and heat pumps to cut natural gas use. Crisis creates the opening, deployment fills it, and the world takes another leap toward the low-carbon future. And that's why I wanted to talk to him now, to understand how Jigger views our collective moment as we look back on 2025 and gear up for what's ahead in 2026. I've listened to interviews with Jigger, I've watched his keynote speeches, and I was still struck, actually more like blown away, by how forcefully, how strongly, how confidently he describes the moment we're in right now. His headline for 2025 is this: for the first time in his lifetime, essentially all global load growth came from clean sources, solar, wind, nuclear, which means we're not actually talking anymore about a future transition. We're living inside it. In this conversation, we talk about the new dynamics of this transition moment, how affordability is already the driver pushing people to embrace climate solutions, why government leaders have the wrong policy prescriptions and need to catch up to technologies that are already proven and available, what an aging grid and exploding data center demand means for what comes next, and what Jigger thinks we need most: people who can build. And of course, I haven't even mentioned the chapter in his career that made him a household name in climate circles, the role he played in the Biden administration, running the Department of Energy's Loan Programs Office, helping drive roughly $107 billion in announced deal volume to scale clean energy and domestic manufacturing in the United States. Jigger doesn't need an introduction if you're in this world, but it's fascinating to think through his career, where he is today, and how he sees what's coming. Here's my conversation with Jigger. Jigger, welcome to Supercool.
Thanks for having me.
Last we spoke in a format like this was probably over half a dozen years ago, and you've been somewhat busy, so it's nice to reconnect. There were some things we had talked about then, which I know are going to come up today as we reflect back on 2025, talk about where we're going in 2026, hear from your experience, and thinking about the through line that I have seen in talking to you and following your career and the work that you do, is this notion of how do we prepare? How do we get the clean energy technologies? How do we get first of their kind technologies? How do we get all of these clean energy solutions from 0 to 1 to the place where they're actually commercially viable, scaling, but really, really ready when the moment strikes to roll them out and actually go full bore into that low carbon future, waiting for the emergency or the crisis, but having everything ready to make that happen. And I'm going to pause because there's other things rattling around my head, but that has struck me through the work at DOE and just the work prior. Is that a fair assessment of your worldview of what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I'm a man on a mission, right? When Richard Branson tapped me to run the carbon war room in 2009, I took very seriously the concept of a war room, a Churchillian war room. And, all the things that FDR did to prepare us, the arsenal of democracy and all of that work, right? And so that's where we are. And it's extraordinary to watch how well prepared we were this year, right? 2025 was an extraordinary year for climate solutions.
Absolutely. So what we have found in the way that I think about this moment is that it seems to me, and as we start to reflect back, and I'm going to ask you for your reflections on what's transpired this year, that this is a different time. This is a different era. 2025, 2026, and what was transpiring, while you were in the Biden administration. But this is not a conversation about, can we do this someday? The solutions are here. They are being deployed. Having worked in this for so long, does it feel that way to you? Do you feel like we've arrived at a different moment? I mean, I know there's setbacks and hurdles and things to overcome and resistance and grid operators and people who want to, who have different points of view. But have technologies advanced? Are we in a place where we are living in a different moment? Does it feel different to you today than, say, 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, we were making arguments that I thought were interesting and relevant 3, 5, 10 years ago. Today, the people that I interact with are making those arguments to me and not acknowledging at all that we were making those arguments earlier. So when you think about the fact that the EU is now saying that it is a defense imperative for them to manufacture EVs and batteries in the continent. I've been saying that for 10 years. They're not acknowledging the fact that I'm saying that to them, but they're saying we now independently believe that as part of a strong defense, we need to have the supply chain for electrical mobility in our continent, right? When you think about where we are in Pakistan, where the Chinese Belt and Road system subsidized a natural gas plant for them, and then the Pakistan government couldn't afford to buy the natural gas to power that plant, they got plunged into rolling blackouts, and the entire country was like, we got this, we're just moving to solar. And so 25% of the whole country's grid is now on solar. That's one household at a time, one YouTube video at a time, because it was all DIY. It was all do-it-yourself installed. And so when you think about the fact that we've been talking about the fact that this stuff is resilient, that you could just buy the stuff on Amazon, have it shipped to your house and do it yourself, we're now there, not just in Pakistan, but also in the United States. We have this thing called permissionless DERs, right? Distributed energy resources, where you can buy stuff online, install it in your front yard, and just plug it into the outside outlet. You don't even need an electrician. There's Father's Day specials that are coming out that are saying, here, buy this $3,000 battery, and you could run your television in the backyard with all the boys. We're there. And so I am in a place right now where I'm I couldn't even imagine when this was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen, but when it was going to happen. And now that it's happened, during a time when the sitting president of the United States is basically just bad-mouthing your industry all day. I mean, who would have thought that this was the year?
Awesome. All right. So with that said, We're going to look back together on some of the big stories of 2025, kind of what we've already alluded to. Look ahead to 2026, recognizing this is a continuum. But let's just jump in. When you look back on 2025 in climate and energy, what's the one sentence headline in your head?
100% of all of the load growth in the entire world for the first time in my lifetime has come from solar, wind, and nuclear.
Massive.
Yeah.
Massive.
I mean, the whole world, China, India, Ethiopia, Mexico, the United States, 100% of all electricity load growth in the entire world came from solar, wind, and nuclear. And now that will be the case for the rest of my lifetime, right? Like the thing that people don't understand is we're building new natural gas, but we're retiring natural gas at the exact same rate that we're building new natural gas. We're retiring coal at the exact same rate that they're building new coal. And my sense is that'll shift and we'll be retiring more than we put on board, here soon. But 100% of all growth is coming from clean sources. I mean, that is an extraordinary feat.
So I was reading recently about some of the changes that are going on at the DOE and the Loan Program Office, and some new things are in, some things are out. Secretary Wright's talking about this is the new path to energy affordability, reliability, security, et cetera. And when I read what they're saying, and I think as a lot of people would say as well, none of what they're describing smacks in any way affordability. They talk about things that sound great. Office of fusion, cool. Like that's awesome, right? Let's do an office of geothermal, wonderful. But there is no utility scale geothermal. I mean, I know Fervo has one project, but that's not really real. Fusion is coming maybe someday in the future. But you have all of these technologies that are here that could drive affordability that we're really no longer paying attention to or are getting deprioritized, at least in Washington. And I'm just curious for you, I know you've talked about this a lot, but how do you see this dynamic if the goal is affordability, and affordability is what keeps leaders in power, right? Never mind clean energy, but if you're not paying attention to what's actually here and could actually achieve the goals, how do you think about that? How do you think about what's happened along these lines over the past year?
Well, it's sad, right? I mean, Secretary Wright is a remarkably smart guy, and we used to be at Riverstone with Lord John Brown and all those folks. And so it's not like he doesn't know all the stuff that we're talking about. I mean, he used to invest in the stuff we're talking about, right? And he did invest in the stuff we're talking about at Liberty Energy. When he was CEO, he was an investor in Fervo, an investor in a nuclear company, and an investor in a sodium-ion battery company. And so it's not that he doesn't know this. Look, I think that when people are truly in trouble, right? And today, close to 1 in 4 households now in the United States are behind on at least one energy bill, right? And so when people are truly in trouble, they reach for solutions. And the federal government is not offering any. It is what it is. They're commercializing new technology, which, is part of their role. So commercializing nuclear and geothermal and next generation battery storage and that kind of stuff, which is great, critical minerals. But we luckily have an industry that employs over 1 million people that are providing solutions every day. So, when I talk to my friends and say, hey, what are you doing? They're like, we're going to put solar and battery storage in. And they're getting it financed with the financing solutions that are available at billion-dollar scale. And, the average income this year of people who are putting in solar and battery storage is less than $60,000 household income. So it's pretty damn accessible. And you're starting to see that across the board with heat pumps and, like every single household that's buying new appliances right now is choosing smart appliances because they want to control their appliances with an app on their phone. And now the utilities have 433 utility programs across the country. We'll say, we'll give you a discount if you register that smart appliance into the program that we're offering. And so, look, I mean, there's not a lot of leadership coming out of the federal government, but there's a ton of leadership coming out of the 1 million people across the country who work in affordability solutions, who are helping people weatherize their home, figuring out how to do energy efficiency, figuring out how to replace old appliances. So it's working.
As I'm talking to you, the sense of like where we are is actually taking me a little back. I mean, this tends to be what we see and what we focus on. But the way that you're describing kind of the moment where we find ourselves, I wasn't necessarily honestly expecting to hear that, I guess, so strongly, confidently in this conversation. I mean, what we've seen, and it's very heartening to hear, we talk to companies like Quilt, who's figured out this AC heat duct, mini split system, did the first over-the-air software update for an HVAC air conditioning system, more powerful than ever before. And when I was talking with their co-founder CEO, and he was saying, look, like the good news is the solutions that lead us to the clean energy future are just better.
They are.
Right? And what I'm hearing from you is like, not only are they just better, they're actually here even more than people understand. They're actually rolling out because this is like affordability now meets clean energy in a way that probably is not even readily understood. And from your lens, even the momentum in the market is bigger than most people understand. Is that fair?
Well, it's not only bigger than most people understand, it's also intuitive. And that's the thing, right? Is that you've got a president of the United States who is every day saying, I don't want to help you, that affordability is a Democratic hoax, and that I don't want to engage. Like, everything is affordable. Like, I don't know what you think is happening around here, right? Gasoline prices are down to below $3 a gallon in most states in the United States. And most people are going back to him saying, well, I don't heat my house with gasoline. Natural gas prices have almost doubled in our country. I don't power my flat screen TV and keep my beer cold with gasoline. And so the fact that my electricity rates are up because natural gas prices are up means that I have to go and get another solution. And the fact that the Department of Energy is not saying anything, they're just saying, well, here's who we want you to blame, right? Solar, wind, and battery storage or whatever. They're not offering solutions. And so people are intuitively going, well, what could a solution be? And they're saying, oh, a solution that makes me more self-reliant. Right? I don't want to rely on the utility companies. I don't want to rely on this group or that group. I want to be more reliant on something that's actually physically at my house. And you can try to put a diesel generator in, but that would increase the cost of your electricity bill by 3x. So they're going, well, I guess we should do the stuff that actually saves me 20% of my electricity bill. I don't want to lecture people. My job is to figure out how to take these companies who have done extraordinary work and figure out how to commercialize their technologies. And now we're at a place where their technologies are commercial and you can buy them and they're available. And your county is now doing an aggregation and saying, well, if you join your neighbors and buy 100 solar systems at the same time, everyone gets another 20% off. So now you've got local community organizations that are getting involved with helping their neighbors on saving money. It's all happening organically because this president and this Secretary of Energy is like, you're on your own, man. We don't want to help you. We have no good ideas for you. We don't want to help you. Our friends are fine and happy and we're good. Fend for yourselves. And then the folks who have solutions happen to be the folks who are in clean energy.
Okay, so as I'm hearing you talk about it, what I'm thinking through is we talked with Mary Powell, CEO of Sunrun. I'm sure you know Mary. And we were having this conversation about how they've really transitioned to a storage-first company, of course, the biggest solar company in terms of installs in the country. I mean, they've done over 1 million homes, but really moving to storage first. And we had this conversation, I suppose, earlier this year, and she was saying, look, Josh, the unlock is kind of like what you're saying, Jigger, but we just realized we need to go to customers to stop talking about kilowatt hours and just start talking about what matters to people in their lives, right? Affordability, financial stability, resilience, if the power is going to go out, which is in certain parts of the country happening more and more. But it was like a shift within the culture of the company. And I've had that conversation with lots of CEOs, like the CEO of Trove, different industry, right? But they're doing re-commerce. If you go on Patagonia, right? You buy a used puffer or whatever, they're powering that, right? And when he came into the company, though, and he came in a couple of years ago, he said to the company, he's like, okay, the first rule of Trove, kind of like Fight Club, we don't talk about climate because there's so much we can go do here to make companies more money by reselling goods. The margins are better, customer acquisition costs go down, people love it, just the brand halo effect. We'll get to climate, but people are happy to talk about climate. Once the solution's up and running and the client's happy, then we're all going to celebrate the sustainability impact because it's there. What I'm hearing from you is, sure, but people are realizing on their own, maybe because it's just so obvious, that these clean energy solutions do serve their self-interest in a way now because they are more commercialized, prices have come down. They get it on their own. They don't necessarily even need to be marketed to you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and Trove is the same. I wear the same exact North Face jacket that I bought when I had almost no money and I was spent all the money I had that year on a North Face jacket in 1997, and I still wear that today, right? And I went back to the North Face store, and they fixed a zipper that I had a problem with, and then it feels like it's brand new. And today, when you look at all the clothing companies who've been bought out by unscrupulous folks who now send cheap crap, you're like, I'd rather have a used North Face jacket than buy more cheap crap from some private equity-backed branding company, right? And so I think people are recognizing again that you need to buy quality, right? And whether it's solar or whether it's battery storage or whether it's high quality outerwear, you should be buying high quality stuff and keeping it for the rest of your life.
Let's switch over to a couple other topics that I want to get your thoughts on. The first relates to something I heard you say. We'd mentioned what's going on in Europe a little bit earlier in the conversation, but it's something I heard you say recently in an interview when you were talking about kind of comes back to this moment of wanting to be prepared. Go build first of its kind technologies, get them to scale, get them ready for the moment when a crisis strikes. Maybe it's a war, let's be ready. Maybe it's an energy war. Maybe Miami goes underwater and we all have to react now, whatever it might be. But you mentioned in Europe the response to the war between Russia and Ukraine, where Europe was actually able to vastly reduce its dependence on Russian natural gas. But most of that gain was not from just switching to a different supplier. I think you said something like 60% of that gain came from energy efficiency, switching to heat pumps, things that the European nations did to actually have just more independence and resilience, and to actually cut their dependence on natural gas overall. And I found that really striking, and I'm just would love to kind of hear more about how you see that development, what the takeaways are from something like that.
It's scary stuff, right? I'll give you an example. So like if you look at the UK government right now, the UK government has an energy affordability crisis, and their average home uses twice as much energy per square foot as the same home in Germany. The same exact home in Germany, roughly the same weather patterns, all the same stuff. And, like they can fix it. And they can fix it for way cheaper than the subsidies that they're paying right now for their energy. Across Europe, they're spending hundreds of billions of dollars a year on, protecting industrial companies, figuring out how to make sure people don't go out of business, providing one-time credits to people's bills, et cetera. But when you talk to the UK government or you talk to some of these other governments, what they'll say to you is that, Jigger, we don't know how to do that, right? And I was like, yeah, but what's one of your bigger challenges? They're like, well, men under the age of 29 don't have meaningful, purposeful work. I was like, well, working with your hands, like fixing people's houses and making them more habitable and, doing all that stuff is real purposeful work. People like joining the trades. They like being plumbers and electricians and stuff like that, right? And they're like, oh, yeah, I guess we should pair this with a workforce program. I was like, yeah, you should pair this with a workforce program, right? And then when you ask them, like, you guys are the leading company in the entire world on demand flexibility, right? With Octopus and Kraken and some of these other companies. They're like, oh yeah, we are really good at that stuff. We should make sure all these smart appliances and everything else get registered into a demand flexibility program. And we should be giving people practically free electricity during times where the offshore wind and the solar are going nuts for their electric vehicles, right? And so like part of the problem right now is that yes, Europe deployed gargantuan amount of heat pumps and did tons of stuff right in the wake of the Ukraine crisis, and they did less than 10% of the potential. The other 90% still out there. And when you ask them, like in their mind, it's easier to build a new nuclear plant than it is to fix up 28.9 million homes in the UK. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, let's fix these homes up. And it's just one of those things where I feel like part of my challenge is that the vast majority of politicians and others in the world would rather do one big $20 billion deal than recognize that we need to do 28 million 5,000 pound deals. It's just what it is. We have a lot of existing building stock and we got to fix it all. And it's way cheaper than building a nuclear plant. And we should build a new nuclear plant, by the way. Like, I'm not suggesting it's either or. We should do both. But it's easier for them to announce a big deal with Rolls-Royce building 4 SMR, small modular nuclear reactors, than it is to announce a big program to do 500 billion pounds, all private sector money, to be clear, like we don't need public money for this, to go fix up everybody's houses. And by the way, the amount of reduction in natural gas consumption and electricity consumption by doing that would make everyone's electricity bills go down by 30%, the remaining electricity bill, right? And so it's one of those things where it's counterintuitive. And the vast majority of government decision makers are like, that seems hard. We can't do hard things in our country anymore. And I was like, what? What are we talking about? You just did hard things in response to the Ukraine conflict. Do more. Let's dig in further, right? Let's help people have more comfortable homes.
We had a conversation with the former mayor of Bristol, Marvin Rees, on the show, which was really interesting because I think Bristol may be the 3rd largest city in the UK. I'm not sure, but he did something that was very hard for a mayor to do. He actually got $1 billion of climate financing, right, by partnering with the private sector. Some of the projects were like what you're talking about. Like, we've got all these low-income housing. We have to make them more energy efficient. We have to save on bills, et cetera, et cetera. And we had this conversation because this piece around climate finance for cities is really challenging. After World War II, with Bretton Woods and the financial system we have, cities aren't really at the table globally when we're talking about where dollars are going to flow. Obviously, there's a lot of movement to try to fix that, recognizing Okay, 80 years later, we live in a much more urbanized world. People are in these centers. These centers ought to have more say over getting the money and spending the money. Is that a dynamic that you're kind of keyed into as well? Like understanding, yes, okay, $2 trillion are flowing globally, 2.2 trillion globally in clean energy investment, but is the money going to the decision makers to really maybe best at understanding how to actually go put that money to work? Do you get engaged in that kind of at this sort of sub-national level? Like, okay, you could go spend the money, but who's going to spend the money and who's going to have access to it?
It's all norms. Like, this is the thing that Donald Trump has taught us all. And, I think that people need to learn from. Like, the reason why utility companies don't fix up people's homes and do this work is because they don't want to, not because they don't have the right to. And the city of Bristol and many other cities around the world have the ability to force their utility companies to do it. These are all fully regulated monopolies that serve at the pleasure of the elected officials, whether it's the airport authority or the transit authority or the way in which the roads are set up or the way in which, electricity and water and sewer are delivered to people's homes. Those are all utility companies, right? So what happened was in the 1960s or so, people are like, you know what, peace out. Like, I don't want to deal with this stuff. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to regulate it. I just want to have some professional class of people that we outsource it to. The airport commission, the water board, the sewer board or whatever, and I'm going to stay out of it. Now, at the time, that was a great idea, right? Because it was corrupt and whatever. And so they were like, we should have a professional class of people. Well, now it's become corrupt the other way. So now you've got a bunch of people who are like, I only want to do things like my grandfather did it in the 1960s. I don't want to acknowledge that any new technologies have been invented. I don't want to do anything new and interesting. I don't want to help poor people. I just want to do things exactly the way my grandfather taught me how to do them, right? And the mayor of Bristol controls whether that continues to be the case because they have to provide permission on a daily basis to the utility to operate in their city. And they can say that permission ends today. We're not going to give you a permit to do jack until you actually change the way that you do business. And you do it this way, that way, and the other way, right? They could do that next week. But they don't know that they can do that because they haven't done it since the 1960s. And so they don't know that they have this much power over all of that money. All of the money that we spend in our country on infrastructure can be heavily influenced by the elected officials in that jurisdiction. But they don't know that they can, and so they don't. And so as a result, there's the 2.2 trillion that you're talking about, but there's another 2.2 trillion that is spent in completely random ways that they could actually have a huge amount of influence over, but they don't because they don't exercise their influence.
Let's stay on this. One of the things I heard you say recently, too, which really struck me, kind of in the moment post the elections for governor in Virginia and New Jersey, you were talking about the fact that if someone went to those governors and kind of post-election or today and said, okay, what are your top 5 policies to drive energy or clean energy? Like, what are you going to do? I've heard you say that really the challenge is that at almost every level of government today, people don't actually really know what tools are available to them and what they actually should be doing or technologies to actually drive the transition forward right now, whether it's for affordability and toward the clean energy future. I think you said it like a month ago, right?
Yeah,
so
that's exactly right.
Can you elaborate on that? Like, what should we be thinking about? I mean, it sounds like there is just this challenge of like things have moved really fast in a positive way for what you could do. Some of the thinking is outdated on what the leaders think the clean energy transition is or was, or the dynamic that they live in or operating in. But you have a very different take, and I'd really love to understand that more.
So it depends on exactly what sector we're talking about, and we can talk about several.
Sure.
But I mean, just taking electricity and data centers for a second. You're in Virginia. If you want to build a new data center right now, it's an 8-year wait. So Dominion says it'll be 8 years before we can interconnect your data center, right? Which basically means that it's ridiculous. Like, you can't build a data center in Virginia, right? Now, for Governor-elect Spanberger, Every single person in Virginia hates data centers. I mean, I don't care whether you're MAGA, whether you're a Bernie bro, whether you're like, a bulwark person, right, who is center right, who's now center left, whether you're like Pod Save America, like all of those people are anti-data centers now. And so she's like anti-data centers, fine. But the economic development is pretty large. I mean, I think 90% of all of the revenues of Loudoun County are from data centers. So now the question is, what can you do? Well, there's like 50 venture-backed startup companies who've proposed what they can do on data centers. They say that basically you can just mandate that data centers not use electricity from the grid for the 200 hours a year where it's inconvenient for them to use electricity. The other 8,500 hours a year, there's so much capacity that having the data center there actually reduces everybody's electricity bill by 5%. Because you're using unused capacity, they're paying for it, and that reduces everybody else's bill. And so the question is, what do you do for that extra 2% or 200 hours a year, right? And the question is, do we need to be prescriptive? No, we don't have to be prescriptive. We can just say, we're giving you the right to turn on, but we're going to restrict you from not using electricity these 200 hours a year. You figure it out. You want to put some behind the meter natural gas engines? Fantastic. You want to put in a bunch of mega packs from Tesla? Go for it. Oh, you want to give everybody free batteries in their residential homes on the same circuit so that you can turn those on when your data center's off? So, that's how you're powering your data center? Go, do it. That's the bring your own capacity stuff that Voltus is doing. All of those people have venture capital and have already deployed their solutions 20 times. But Lord Almighty, when you go to the governor-elect, she's like, is that real? Is that something you can do? And then she's like, well, my trusted advisor is the CEO of the utility company. And the CEO of the utility company is like, madam, I don't know. That seems risky. My grandfather wouldn't have done it that way. And I was like, what? What are we doing? Seriously, right? And so, on this side, you've got Zach Dell that just raised $1 billion and a $3 billion pre-money valuation to basically put batteries everywhere in a residential community. And I guarantee you that almost everybody in Virginia, if you said, hey, would you like a battery that we charge you $20 a month for, but it just sits there in the back and it's 30 kilowatts, so it can literally run anything, anytime for you? They'd be like, yeah, sign me up, $20 a month. I'll do that all day. And then when you say, by the way, we can actually put in a vehicle to grid charger, which was invented and popularized in Virginia. And this means that your Rivian that you buy can now power your house for 7 days. Would you want that and have the utility own the charger? But in exchange, there's 4 hours a day that the charger won't work. The other 20 hours, it'll be fine. But 4 hours, randomly, the utility can choose whatever 4 hours they want. The charger won't work, but the other 20 hours, it'll work. Would you go that trade? Yeah, I'll do that trade all day. I just think these are, again, a system that is already available, right? It's something that's already there. And, when you talk to people, what you find is they're like, wait, is this real? I was like, are you kidding me? The entire country of the UK does this. And so part of the challenge is that these governors have been told by CEOs of utility companies that this stuff is risky. In the meantime, you've got 5,000 companies that have gotten venture capital, many of which are terrible ideas, to be clear. And, 1,100 of them are still thriving and doing great, and they've got real solutions, and they have a bunch of $200,000 customers when they need $200 million customers. You're in this unique spot where, Governor-elect Spanberger and Governor-elect Sherrill are saying we are going to need to reduce the cost of the PJM capacity auction. Esoteric concept, I know, but it's 15% of everybody's bills in Virginia and in New Jersey. What solves that problem? 2,000 megawatts of batteries. If you put in 2,000 megawatts of batteries in Virginia and New Jersey, it solves the problem the next day. The next capacity auction, which the PJM has already said, if you put in 2,000 megawatts of batteries, that capacity auction will come in by half and everyone will get 7.5% off their bill. We built 19,000 megawatts of batteries in the United States this year. Building 2,000 megawatts of batteries in New Jersey and Virginia, I could do in my sleep. But do you know who doesn't believe they can do that? The utilities, the elected officials, the Board of Public Utilities. They're like, oh, that seems like a lot, Jigger. How about we start with 100 megawatts? What? We start with 100 megawatts? Are we kidding ourselves? We are in a crisis. Texas can build 10,000 megawatts in 1 year, but little old New Jersey can't build 2,000 megawatts in 1 year? Give me a break. Of course they could.
Technology's deployed, technology's proven. What I'm thinking as you're talking, we talked with Tim Holt, who's a board member at Siemens Energy, runs their grid technology.
Yeah, amazing guy.
Yeah, fantastic guy. Really, really fun to talk to. And he said, kind of like what you're saying, if you're a CEO of a utility, you don't get fired for keeping the grid going as it is, right?
No, you get paid $26.1 million for doing jack nothing. Like, honestly, the CEOs of utility companies are everyone's dream job. You do zero work. You have 50 people that work for you that basically do all the work. You say no to everything. You raise everyone's rates by double the price of inflation every year, and you never get fired. And you're like, how the hell are you not just like the head of a government agency making $500,000 a year? No, you're like the head of a utility company making millions of dollars a year to do jack squat.
Who's different? Who has a different model going? I mean, we've looked at Rocky Mountain Power, some of the things happening in Utah, which seem pretty interesting. I don't know if it's really pushing as far as it needs to go. But who's interesting to you? Who's driving a shift?
Well, look, I'll give you an example of somebody who is in a tough situation that's doing a great job. So if you look at like Gil Quinones, who runs ComEd. ComEd is a utility company that's owned by the Exelon group of companies. So that's Pepco, Baltimore Gas and Electric, PECO in Pennsylvania, right? Gil Quinones is as good as they get, was the chair of, the utilities at EPRI, like ran the New York Power Authority, as good as it gets. But he's like, look, Jigger, I cannot do all this decision making on my own because I would get fired if they made me do it on my own. So I need the state of Illinois to pass a law that forces me to do this stuff. And then I can go to my shareholders and say, look, I'm doing all this stuff because the state of Illinois is forcing me to do it. And it happens to actually reduce everybody's bills by 5%. And so, he figured out how to pass a law in Illinois. They're mandating that he deploy $1 billion worth of batteries. It'll save $12 billion in ratepayer savings, to be clear. But he has to be forced to do it. He's like, I can't get permission to do it otherwise. And so part of the people that I respect is not people who like go within their system and do all sorts of crazy stuff and they get fired, right? That doesn't do anybody any good. But the people who understand that the boundaries that they're in are, yes, self-made, but real. They can't have their stock price going down by 10% while they're CEO. And so they say to their governors and whisper in their ear, hey, we're going to look the other way if you mandate me do things that actually reduce people's electricity bills. And then, then they work with their lobbyists to pass that law. Of course, they didn't have any fingerprints on it because they can't. And then they go do a bunch of great stuff that saves people money, right? I think Xcel Minnesota is doing a lot of this great work in Minnesota as well. What they're doing, where they're rate basing, they're owning a bunch of batteries in strategic locations, which will be 90% cheaper than upgrading all those distribution grids to meet peak power, is sending shockwaves through the utility system. And people are like, why are you doing that? We like to run up the scoreboard and spend way more money than we need to. Like, that's how we make more money as shareholders. And they're like, look, we can't bring economic development projects online fast enough. We're giving people a 4-year timeline right now, and people are leaving the state of Minnesota. How are we meeting our obligations as a utility company around economic growth if we're giving people 4-year timelines? This allows us to connect them within 1 year. And so I think they're doing great work. I think the folks at CenterPoint down in Houston, they got caught with their pants down during Winter Storm Uri and, other challenges. And they've seen religion. They're like, yeah, you're right. We have to deploy technology at scale. So they're doing a lot of virtual power plants and other things. I think Georgia Power is doing great work, but it's after they got beat up in a really big way out of the Vogtle nuclear plant and some of the cost increases. So they're deploying grid enhancing technologies at scale with line vision. And so I think there's a lot of utility companies doing great work, but I think we all need to recognize that they live within a system that basically, they enjoy their multi-million-dollar salaries, so they have to live within that system. They don't want to break it. But there are ways for them to be useful and helpful in this area within that system. And so I'm working with a lot of those utility CEOs right now saying, hey, would you guys look the other way if we pass a law in your state that mandates demand flexibility? And they're like, yes, we would, Jigger. We would love to look the other way, but you're right. We do need that law to be passed. We do need to be forced to use the assets we've already paid for more efficiently. But we're not capable of doing that within the way in which our shareholders and everybody else works right now. So just pass a law and force me to do it.
Okay. When you speak of norms, the norms really are like, hey, here's the state of affairs. Here's the way energy works in America. And here's how it's always been. And these utilities are monopolies. So the norm is that those who were elected into power actually don't understand that they have more power to change the situation. But you have to still got to go pass laws, right? I mean, it's a regulated industry.
But it's easy to pass laws. I mean, J.B. Pritzker passed a law in Illinois. I mean, Wes Moore in Maryland has supermajorities in both the House and the Senate. He could pass a law next week. I mean, they've passed laws in Maryland that Wes Moore has not implemented. They have a mandate to deploy 1,800 megawatts of batteries. They could do that next week. They haven't even done the first battery yet. Clearly, like, the norm for Wes Moore is not to do anything. I mean, that's sort of where you are. Maura Healey over in Massachusetts has the ability to create distributed system operators, right? She can just wake up one morning and say, we're going to mandate the active management of each of the distribution circuits, which then leads to more batteries getting deployed and batteries getting compensated. And that's how the UK works. I just think that in general, she has that ability to do that. Kathy Hochul can do that as well. I mean, a lot of the mayors and like Mamdani, there's lots of things he can't do. He made a lot of promises that he can't keep because the state of New York has to actually weigh in there. Con Ed in New York, he can do all that stuff himself. He can work with Con Ed next week and actually get a lot of that stuff done. But does he know how to do it? Do any of the people that like knew how to do interesting TikTok videos for him so he could go viral know how to do that? No. Is he going to fill those positions with super smart people? I don't know. The mayor of Cincinnati is in a deregulated state in Ohio, and one day woke up and said, you know what, I could build a 100 megawatt solar farm 100 miles away from the city and basically be powered by that solar farm. He did that. As a result, Cincinnati has half the generation costs of the rest of the state because he locked in a lower price in 2018, 2019. And then he also has 50% of all the residents in Cincinnati that have joined his buying pool for the city to negotiate a better price for everybody. Every mayor could do that next week in the deregulated states. Are they doing it? No, of course not. And so they have all this control, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's for instance, in Israel and in Germany, they use the sewer lines as geothermal lines. Every single city in the country could use their sewer lines as geothermal lines. No city in the United States has done it. But, they've all been pitched it for 10 years. That requires the mayor to go to the sewer authority and say, you shall do this. And it's half the price of natural gas.
All right. Well, this is awesome. It's a lot to digest. I appreciate all the perspective that you're providing. So to come back to kind of the initial where we started this conversation, I've felt just as an observer, and a lot of people have followed your career closely with admiration and a lot of respect. And just thinking back to a conversation, last I spoke to you on a podcast, like I said, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, we had talked about, I think I was pressing you and I was like, well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And you were like, okay, you want to know what I really think? And I was like, yes. What do you really think? You're like, when Miami eventually falls into the ocean, we have to make sure we have all the technologies that have gotten 0 to 1. So when the government is ready to say, right, we're taking over the means of production, like in a World War II type model, we're actually going to get this done. To think about this conversation that we've just had, and think about all of the things that are now here, all of the technologies that are now proven, de-risked, being deployed, if we're even just talking about the data centers and the grid and the opportunities that are available to governors. What are the drivers that get governors, get leaders to say, I actually am going to do this? Is it affordability? Is it elections? Is it some more pain where it becomes more apparent
we're
to them
there.
that
No, look, we're there, right? So
Okay.
When Russia invaded Ukraine, we deployed a lot of energy efficiency and heat pumps. We just got to keep it going. When Pakistan's big natural gas facility failed, they're now weaning themselves off of coal and they're building a ton of renewable energy. When Ethiopia realized that they had way too much hydropower through the new hydropower facility that they built, they just banned internal combustion engine cars from coming into the country, and now they're using electric vehicles, right? When you had an electricity crisis in New Jersey and Virginia, the governor said, you know what, we're going to get smart on this issue and we're going to figure out how to deploy these solutions. So in every single place around the world where people are facing a crisis, people are saying, hey, what about this thing that's been going on for 20 years in the background that I haven't been paying attention to? Could there be a solution in there? And look, all of the consultants around them don't know anything about this and are not experts in this, but they're like, I know a guy, right? And, I listened to this extraordinary podcast with Josh and there was a guy talking about it and we're going to implement that solution. So it's happening right now before our eyes. Who would have thought that electricity, which is always a number 22 political issue, is now a number 2 political issue? There are governors who are running for re-election in 26 who are like, I'm going to lose my job unless I have a real policy around this. And, I tried to use building more natural gas as my official policy. And that's just raising rates even faster. And so that's not working. Like, I know I'm supposed to be anti-solar and wind, but let's revisit solar and wind. And so in every red state and every blue state and every like red county and blue county, they're now looking at all these solutions and going, I know I'm not supposed to be for this stuff, but I might get voted out of office if I don't deploy this stuff, right? And so it's happening before our eyes. I mean, Indonesia has these huge crises on their hands right now on energy. Something like on the order of 10 or 12% of their entire GDP is now going to, or their entire budget of their federal government, is going into energy subsidies. It's unsustainable. They're like, we need to replicate what Pakistan did. Like, we need to get that done, right? It's happening. Now, I thought it was probably going to take Miami going into the ocean. I'm glad it's not, because Miami's an awesome place. But every single crisis, which seems to be happening with more and more regularity, is now featuring clean energy technologies as a solution.
As you look ahead to 2026, what do you see? Is it a continuation? Are there things on the horizon?
I see a huge worker shortage. And I think what we need to do more than anything into 2026 is take the 20%. We have 20% unemployment right now for young people. And we need to get a lot of those people reprogrammed, because a lot of them thought that their life was to become a college graduate and then have no job after that. And we need to get them all to become electricians and plumbers and carpenters. And we need to say, look, this is a great career. It's a great job. Electricians right now building data centers are making $500,000 a year. Like, these are great careers. You look buff, you look swole after, coming back from a day's work, right? And so I think that 2026 is really about workforce, and it's really about getting the stigma of working in the trades to be gone. Like, parents need to be encouraging their children to go in the trades and not just going to college and racking up college debt just to do it.
Jigger, thank you so much for coming on the show, spending time.
Of course.
With me. This is great, man. It's a lot to think about, but I really, really value your perspective, and it's really nice to have a chance to hear it and reconnect with you. Wishing you continued success in the year ahead.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And thank you for listening. If you're enjoying Supercool and appreciate our conversations that merge climate, innovation, and commerce, please take a moment to subscribe and leave us a review. It's the best way you can help the show reach other future-forward decision makers who would benefit from these conversations too. See you next time.